Step into a world where desperate dreams collide with ruthless ambition, and one fateful decision shatters the confines of an ordinary life. Subscribe now to join the journey into a tale of love, betrayal, and power that will leave you breathless. Now, witness the beginning of Emma Hollis' extraordinary odyssey, a journey from the gritty streets of Miami to the dazzling, yet treacherous, realms of wealth and influence. Emma Hollis never imagined that her destiny could be anything more than the relentless fight for survival. Born in a forgotten corner of a gritty city, she learned early that life did not hand out fairy tales. At 26, Emma had already been forced to sacrifice her dreams on the altar of necessity. By day, she worked tirelessly as a bartender in a dim, rundown Miami club, a place where neon lights struggled against the shadows and where wealthy patrons, drowning in their own decadence, barely spared her a glance. The club's atmosphere was heavy with the scent of spilled alcohol and unfulfilled promises. Emma moved behind the bar with a practiced smile, one that concealed her fatigue and the echo of a past filled with lost ambitions. Her small studio apartment on the outskirts of downtown was a mirror of her daily struggle. With peeling wallpaper, an ancient air conditioner that groaned rather than cooled, and rattling pipes that disrupted the silence of the night, every element of her life spoke of hardship. Night after night, Emma returned to that cramped space, haunted by the echo of bitter arguments from neighbors and the memories of the dreams she once held. For a brief moment, she had dared to believe that education and a better life were within reach. A semester in college had ignited a spark of hope, only for mounting bills and the crushing reality of survival to douse that flame. Yet, amid the monotony and exhaustion, there was a resilience in Emma. She learned to smile even when her eyes told stories of despair. That survival instinct, honed over years of hardship, kept her going as she served drink after drink to men who existed in a world far removed from her own. Little did Emma know that on one ordinary night, as she maneuvered through the crowded club and dodged the careless advances of inebriated regulars, fate was about to knock on her door. A presence unlike any other made itself known, a man whose gaze held the weight of empires and whose silent observation would soon alter the course of her life. In a quiet moment behind the bar, as she wiped down counters and listened to the murmur of hushed conversations, Emma's attention was drawn to a figure in the shadows. The man's eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers in a way that both unsettled and intrigued her. There was a silent command in his look, a promise of opportunity, of change. She had spent her life being invisible, just another face in the crowd, but tonight, she sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. The moment was electric, charged with the promise of transformation, even if she couldn't yet fathom the magnitude of what was unfolding. For Emma, life had always been a loop of exhaustion and survival. But in that instant, as the man's gaze cut through the smoke-filled air, she felt the stirrings of a destiny that could shatter her former life. The night was pregnant with possibility, a possibility that was about to pull her from the depths of anonymity into a world of power, wealth, and unexpected consequences. With a mixture of apprehension and hope, Emma braced herself for what was to come, unaware that her struggles were about to give way to an entirely different kind of battle, one that would test her in ways she had never imagined. In the days following that fateful night, the memory of those piercing eyes haunted Emma's thoughts. The enigmatic stranger, later revealed to be Olivier Randolph, was a name that resonated in hushed whispers throughout elite circles. At 72, with a legacy built on ruthless business acumen, Olivier had carved his empire from nothing, outlasting competitors and forging a reputation as both visionary and merciless. Emma's encounter with him was nothing short of surreal, an unspoken invitation to step out of her obscurity and into a realm she had never dared to dream of. One quiet evening, as the Miami heat gave way to a sultry night, Emma found herself unexpectedly approached by one of the man's aides. A sleek card was slid onto the counter as if it were a golden ticket. "Mr. Randolph would like to speak with you," the assistant said in a measured tone that left no room for negotiation. With a mix of trepidation and an inexplicable pull toward destiny, Emma decided to meet him. She could hardly fathom that a man whose very presence commanded entire boardrooms and dominated headlines might have even a fleeting interest in someone like her. Their meeting was arranged in a discreet, upscale lounge far removed from the club's dingy confines. As Emma stepped into the lavish surroundings, she couldn't help but feel out of place, an ordinary woman in a world where every detail was meticulously designed to impress. Olivier Randolph awaited her in a private corner, his presence both commanding and unsettlingly intimate. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. "What do you want, Miss Hollis?" It was a question laden with the weight of expectation, and for the first time in years, Emma felt as though someone was genuinely inquiring about her future. Olivier's gaze was penetrating, almost as if he sought to measure every facet of her character before making his decision. The offer he laid out was startling in its simplicity. At first, he needed a companion, a graceful presence to accompany him to high-profile events, to serve as his public face in a world that demanded perfection. The compensation was generous beyond measure, promising financial security that would forever change her mundane existence. Emma, used to scrimping by on meager earnings, found the prospect intoxicating, yet it was tinged with the bitter knowledge that she was being viewed as nothing more than a tool, a means to preserve an image. As the conversation deepened, another layer of the proposal was revealed: marriage. Olivier did not seek a partner for love or companionship. Rather, he needed a wife to solidify his crumbling legacy, to project an image of vitality and success despite his failing health. This was not a union of hearts, but a strategic maneuver, a marriage of convenience that promised freedom from financial insecurity while binding Emma to a world she scarcely understood. Torn between the allure of escape from poverty and the fear of losing herself in an arrangement built on calculated optics, Emma wrestled with a decision that would forever redefine her identity. That night, as she walked back to her modest apartment, the cool Miami air did little to soothe her turbulent thoughts. The weight of the choice pressed heavily on her chest. The idea of leaving behind the harsh reality of her life was both exhilarating and terrifying. She knew that accepting Olivier's proposal would catapult her into a life of unimaginable luxury, yet it would also mean surrendering the little control she had over her own destiny. In the quiet of her lonely room, Emma stared at the cracked ceiling, contemplating whether the promise of a golden future was worth the cost of her very soul. In the weeks that followed the initial meeting, Emma found herself entangled in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Each day, as she went about her routine of slinging drinks and smiling through her exhaustion, her mind raced with images of opulence and possibility. The allure of a life free from financial worry was nearly irresistible, and though she recognized the cost might be steep, the chance to escape the suffocating cycle of poverty was something she could no longer ignore. The decision was not made lightly. It was a crossroads where desperation met opportunity, and every fiber of her being ached for a different future. Olivier's proposal was laid out with the precision of a seasoned negotiator. His plan was simple yet shattering in its implications. Emma was to serve as his companion at a series of high-profile business functions, where her youthful beauty would act as a stark contrast to his aged, imposing persona. Her role was not to be a lover, nor a confidant. She was to be a living symbol of his continued influence, a trophy that would silence whispers of decline. In return, he promised to provide her with an income that would allow her to leave behind the struggle of her past, a lifetime of financial worry replaced by the security of wealth. At first, Emma wrestled with the idea. The notion that she could trade her freedom for luxury was both exhilarating and terrifying. The thought of walking away from her tiny apartment, peeling wallpaper and all, to inhabit a world of extravagant mansions, glittering events, and influential connections stirred a long-dormant hope within her. Yet the proposal carried with it a subtle sting of objectification. Olivier made it clear that he needed her not for love or true partnership, but for appearances, a means to an end. His words, delivered in a tone as cold as the marble floors of his mansion, left no doubt that in this arrangement, her feelings were secondary to the image they wished to project. That very night, Emma lay awake on her modest bed, the darkness punctuated by the hum of a distant air conditioner. She replayed every word, every nuance of Olivier's proposal. In the quiet solitude of her room, her mind spun a web of conflicting images: a life of endless parties, sumptuous dinners, and a steady influx of money on one side, and a haunting sense of emptiness and loss of identity on the other. The prospect of no longer having to work another shift behind the bar filled her with both relief and an inexplicable dread. What if, in trading one prison for another, she found herself even more confined by the gilded cage that was luxury? As the days passed, Emma's internal battle intensified. Her heart yearned for stability and the possibility of a fresh start, yet her soul recoiled at the thought of becoming nothing more than a prop in a grandiose display of wealth and power. Each morning, as she donned her tired smile and stepped into the smoky haze of the club, she wondered if accepting Olivier's deal would mark the beginning of a new chapter or the end of the little life she had managed to cling to. In the end, driven by the relentless urge to escape a future defined solely by struggle, Emma decided to take the leap. She resolved to accept the proposal, hoping that the promise of financial security and a chance at a new identity would be enough to justify the sacrifices demanded of her. That fateful decision set in motion a chain of events that would propel her into a world she had never dared to imagine, a world where every gesture was scrutinized, every smile a performance, and every moment tinged with the bittersweet taste of lost innocence. As Emma prepared herself for the transition, she could not shake the feeling that she was stepping into a role from which there was no easy exit, a role that would test the limits of her strength, resolve, and ultimately, her very identity. The day of the wedding dawned with an unexpected blend of splendor and melancholy, a ceremony staged with meticulous precision, yet underpinned by an undeniable air of foreboding. Emma found herself adrift in a world of silk and satin, where every detail was orchestrated to impress the high society that had gathered. She emerged from her modest dressing room, transformed by a gown that shimmered with hand-sewn beads and delicate embroidery. The dress, reminiscent of an antique relic, trailed behind her like a testament to a fairy tale that was anything but real. Each step toward the altar was measured, each movement choreographed as if her life had become a carefully staged performance. The cathedral where the wedding was held was as grand as it was imposing. Stained glass windows cast kaleidoscopic patterns of light over polished stone floors. Whispers followed Emma down the aisle, a chorus of murmurs branding her a gold digger and a trophy wife. Yet despite the sneers and side glances, she pressed on, determined to honor the deal that had promised her a way out of her squalid existence. As she reached the altar, she saw Olivier waiting. His presence, though diminished by the frailty of age and the constraints of a wheelchair, still radiated authority. His eyes, lined with years of hard-won experience, seemed to appraise her with a detached curiosity. The ceremony proceeded with a clinical formality that left little room for genuine emotion. Vows were exchanged, not of passion, but of contractual obligation. Emma's smile was flawless, a mask honed to perfection for the cameras and the high society guests whose every eye was fixed upon her. Behind closed doors, she knew that their union was devoid of love. It was a union forged in the cold crucible of business strategy, a necessary charade to preserve a crumbling legacy. The lavish reception that followed was filled with clinking glasses, orchestrated laughter, and the kind of carefully chosen pleasantries that belied the undercurrent of disdain. Every toast and every congratulatory remark was a reminder of her role, the beautiful accessory in a world of ruthless power plays. The honeymoon, set against the backdrop of Europe's most celebrated landmarks, was no escape either. It was a continuation of the performance, staged photographs, scripted moments, and public appearances that reinforced the illusion of a perfect couple. Yet in the quiet moments, away from prying eyes and flashbulbs, Emma felt the hollowness of it all. She wandered through opulent corridors and manicured gardens, searching for a hint of authenticity, for something real in a life constructed entirely of facades. In her solitude, she began to question whether the promise of luxury was worth the cost of her own identity. Every sumptuous detail, every golden trinket, seemed to underscore a bitter truth. She had exchanged one form of confinement for another, trading the drudgery of poverty for the gilded prison of a loveless marriage. As the celebration wore on and the guests slowly dispersed, Emma found herself standing alone amid the lingering echoes of the festivities. The grandeur of the cathedral and the shimmering lights of the reception hall did little to mask the emptiness that had taken root in her heart. She had played her role perfectly, a beautiful bride in a meticulously planned spectacle. Yet behind the facade, the cost was already being measured. A part of her soul was slipping away with every step she took down that aisle. In that moment of profound isolation, Emma silently vowed that she would someday reclaim her identity, even if it meant challenging the very foundations of the world she had been forced into. Following the whirlwind of the wedding, Emma's life underwent a drastic transformation. The Randolph estate, an imposing mansion on the outskirts of New York, was a world entirely removed from the humble existence she had known. The sprawling property, with its manicured lawns, marble floors, and endless corridors, was designed to impress. But to Emma, it felt more like a gilded cage. The estate was as beautiful as it was isolating. Its grandeur echoed with emptiness, each room a constant reminder that she now belonged to a realm where every moment was measured by wealth and status. Emma was now thrust into a world where every day was a performance. At lavish cocktail parties, charity galas, and exclusive gatherings, she was expected to radiate poise and charm. Yet beneath the practiced smiles and elegant gestures, there was a gnawing sense of dislocation. The household staff treated her with distant politeness, never quite embracing her as one of their own. Her every interaction was scrutinized by those who whispered about her origin, a mere bartender from Miami now occupying a space among the elite. Even Olivier's own sons, Edward and Jason, harbored a palpable disdain for her. Their eyes were sharp with derision, and their remarks, when voiced in hushed tones behind expensive drinks, were laced with skepticism. "She won't last," they murmured, convinced that she was a temporary fixture in their father's carefully constructed world. As the days turned into weeks, Emma strove to adapt to this new life. She attended business meetings, learned the subtle language of investments and boardroom politics, and even began to forge alliances among the influential circles that orbited the Randolph name. Yet every step forward was marred by a persistent sense of being an imposter, a beautiful facade hiding a vulnerable truth. The opulent corridors of the mansion, designed to instill awe, instead echoed with her loneliness. Even the lavish parties, with their endless streams of champagne and glittering conversations, could not dispel the isolation that crept into her heart after the festivities ended. Late at night, when the mansion fell silent and the distant hum of city life filtered through heavy drapes, Emma would wander the empty halls. Each footstep was a reminder that despite the wealth and security that now surrounded her, she was utterly alone. The bright lights of New York, seen from the towering windows of her new home, appeared cold and indifferent, a stark contrast to the warm, if modest, life she had known in Miami. In those solitary moments, Emma questioned whether the price of her escape had been too high. Could the promise of financial security ever fill the void left by the life she had once known? Trapped in this glittering prison, Emma struggled to reconcile the person she had become with the dreams of her past. The persona she crafted, a poised and elegant Mrs. Randolph, was a mask she wore to survive. Yet, beneath that mask, the echoes of her former self, a woman who had once dared to dream and longed for genuine connection, fought to break free. As she sat alone in a quiet corner of the mansion one evening, she realized that her life had become a series of performances, each one demanding more of her soul. The gilded cage, with its opulent trappings and endless expectations, was suffocating. In that moment, Emma resolved that she would no longer let her identity be dictated by the facade of wealth. There was a quiet rebellion building within her, a desire to reclaim the self that had been buried under the weight of opulence and pretense. Just as Emma began to navigate the complexities of her new life, an unexpected tragedy struck, one that would change everything. After barely 2 years of living as Mrs. Randolph, the unthinkable happened. Olivier Randolph, the man who had once seemed invincible despite his declining health, passed away suddenly. The news hit the upper echelons of society like a shockwave. In the days that followed, the mansion was filled with a tense, hushed atmosphere. The grandeur of the estate, once a symbol of stability and power, now felt like an echo of a life that had slipped away. The funeral was a spectacle befitting the man who had built an empire. Held in an exclusive cathedral draped in opulence, the service was attended by influential figures, high-powered investors, and members of the media eager for a glimpse of scandal. Emma sat in the front pew, surrounded by a sea of guarded expressions. The atmosphere was a blend of solemnity and barely concealed opportunism. In that moment, as she stared at the empty seat where her husband had once sat, a profound numbness washed over her. Despite the elaborate rituals and the grand speeches extolling his legacy, Emma felt only a deep, aching void. The man she had married was gone, and with his departure, the carefully constructed illusion of their union crumbled into irrelevance. 3 days after the funeral, the reading of the will took place in the grand study of the Randolph estate. Surrounded by stern-faced lawyers, distant relatives, and individuals whose eyes betrayed their calculation, Emma braced herself for the outcome she had long feared. Although Olivier had promised her security, it was clear that his fortune was meant to safeguard his empire rather than enrich a woman he had married for optics. As each clause of the will was read aloud, a sense of foregone destiny settled over the room. Edward and Jason, his sons, exchanged knowing glances and thinly veiled smirks. It was a moment of triumph for them, a final act of defiance against the interloper who had dared to change their father's legacy. For Emma, the reading of the will was both an ending and a beginning. The sum she received was enough to ensure that she would never have to return to the drudgery of her past, yet it was a bitter reminder that she had never truly belonged. The realization that her marriage had been nothing more than a transactional arrangement left her feeling hollow. In the midst of mourning, she also experienced a subtle awakening. The legal battle that loomed on the horizon was not simply about money. It was about reclaiming her dignity and challenging the legacy that had once defined her. As the final words of the will echoed in the study, Emma silently vowed that she would fight, not just for the fortune that was rightfully hers, but for the chance to prove that her life was more than a footnote in the storied legacy of the Randolph family. In the aftermath of Olivier's death, Emma's world was shaken to its core. The legal reading of the will had revealed inconsistencies, discrepancies that hinted at hidden deals and assets transferred under the guise of secrecy. Determined not to be cast aside as a mere accessory to the Randolph legacy, Emma decided to challenge the distribution. The spark of defiance, long dormant beneath layers of resignation, ignited a fierce resolve within her. With the assistance of an accomplished team of attorneys, led by the sharp and resourceful Daniel Harper, Emma launched a legal campaign against Edward and Jason, determined to expose the truth behind the estate's murky transactions. The courtroom soon became a battleground where every word, every piece of evidence was scrutinized under the harsh light of public opinion. Edward, with his vast resources and well-connected network, was a formidable opponent. His tactics were ruthless. He manipulated testimonies, leveraged his influence over key officials, and even resorted to subtle intimidation. Yet Emma refused to yield. Every setback, every delay in the legal process only fueled her determination. With Daniel's guidance, she began to uncover documents and inconsistencies that had been buried deep within the Randolph archives, evidence of clandestine deals and transactions that should never have seen the light of day. Public sentiment gradually shifted. The media, once eager to portray her as the opportunistic gold digger, began to present her in a different light, a wronged woman fighting for justice in the face of overwhelming odds. Tabloids and newspapers followed the story with fervor, their headlines chronicling the courtroom drama as if it were a modern-day David versus Goliath tale. As the case unfolded, Emma emerged as a symbol of resilience and determination. With each legal victory, no matter how small, she chipped away at the monolithic power of the Randolph family, forcing Edward and Jason to defend every aspect of their ill-gotten gains. The legal war took its toll on Emma, both physically and emotionally. The constant stress, the relentless pressure of facing off against a man who wielded power like a weapon, left her feeling vulnerable yet strangely empowered. Every day in the courtroom was a battle, a fight to reclaim not only the fortune that had been promised to her, but also her very identity. The legal proceedings stretched on for months, each session an intricate dance of strategy and endurance. In the quiet moments between the court battles, Emma would reflect on how far she had come, from a bartender in Miami to a determined woman standing up against the might of a business empire. With each victory, however small, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Though the wounds of her past were deep, the fight was slowly mending the fractures of her identity, piece by fragile piece. In the end, the legal battle reached a tipping point. Faced with mounting evidence and the unyielding persistence of Emma and her legal team, Edward was forced to the negotiating table. The settlement, shrouded in confidentiality, was a victory that Emma had long envisioned, a testament to her resilience and unwavering spirit. As the courtroom drama drew to a close, Emma emerged battered but unbowed. The victory, though costly, marked the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. In that moment, she realized that the battle had not only been about money. It was a fight for her dignity, her identity, and the chance to finally be seen as more than a pawn in a dangerous game of power. Just as Emma began to taste the bittersweet fruits of her legal victory, the war she had fought so hard to win began to evolve into a more insidious struggle. Edward, bruised by defeat yet determined to maintain control over the Randolph legacy, resorted to new, underhanded tactics. Whispers of manipulation and covert threats emerged from the darkest corners of high finance, casting a long shadow over Emma's newfound freedom. Despite the settlement that should have secured her future, her accounts were suddenly frozen, a calculated move to choke the very life out of her hard-won independence. The shock of seeing her financial security turned into a weapon was a cruel blow. Overnight, the funds that were meant to offer her liberation were ensnared in a web of legal red tape. The bank's vague explanations and endless verifications were not mere bureaucratic delays. They were part of a larger plan engineered by Edward to ensure that Emma remained at his mercy. In the cold light of day, Emma realized that the battle was far from over. The legal war had taken on a new dimension, a personal vendetta where every move was calculated to break her spirit and reclaim the power Edward believed she had no right to. Daniel Harper, ever the steadfast ally, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He unearthed more evidence, documents that revealed a network of secret transactions and hidden deals that Edward had long sought to bury. Each discovery was like a spark in a powder keg, and as Emma's case gained momentum, public sentiment began to shift once more. The narrative in the tabloids changed. No longer was she the opportunistic gold digger. She was now cast as the wronged widow fighting a relentless battle against an empire built on greed and manipulation. As the pressure mounted, Edward's tactics grew increasingly aggressive. Anonymous messages arrived at Emma's door, each laced with threats that were both veiled and explicit. The media, sensing a scandal of epic proportions, followed every twist and turn with voracious hunger. But rather than retreating, Emma's resolve hardened. Each threat, every underhanded move made against her, only reaffirmed her determination to fight for what was rightfully hers. The legal proceedings, now amplified by the raw energy of public support, became a battleground where every word and every document was a strike against injustice. The war escalated in intensity, transforming from a courtroom skirmish to an all-out battle for reputation and survival. Emma was no longer simply fighting for money. She was fighting to reclaim her identity. Every day, as she prepared for another round of legal maneuvering, she found strength in the realization that her struggle resonated with countless others who had been crushed by the weight of power. The momentum was shifting, and with Daniel's strategic brilliance and the unyielding determination of her legal team, Emma began to turn the tide. In a climactic showdown, Edward was forced to concede ground, acknowledging that his efforts to control her destiny were failing. When the final settlement was reached, it was a bittersweet victory, a confidential agreement that signified not just a triumph over a ruthless adversary, but also the beginning of a new chapter in Emma's life. The legal war had exacted its toll, leaving scars that would remain long after the courtroom battles ceased. Yet, as she surveyed the aftermath of the conflict, Emma felt a flicker of hope. The fight had changed her. It had forged in her a strength that transcended money and power. Though Edward's tactics had wounded her spirit, they had also awakened a deep resilience, a determination to rebuild her life on her own terms. The war was over, but its echoes would forever remind her that true freedom was earned not by wealth, but by the courage to stand up and fight. In the wake of the legal triumph, Emma was left with a settlement that promised a secure future. The funds were more than enough to ensure that she would never have to return to the dim confines of her old life. Yet as the ink dried on the confidential agreement, a pervasive emptiness began to seep into her soul. The victory, for all its material gain, felt hollow, like a prize that came at the cost of her very identity. The once glittering mansion that now belonged to Emma loomed large and cold, its opulence serving as a constant reminder of what she had sacrificed. The halls echoed with the memories of a battle fought tooth and nail, a battle that, while won, left behind wounds that no amount of money could mend. Emma found herself isolated in the very home that was supposed to be her sanctuary. The silence was oppressive, and every lavish room, every gilded detail, only deepened the sense of loss. It wasn't just the legacy of Olivier that she now carried. It was the weight of a life spent in constant struggle, the ghosts of the past that refused to be forgotten. In the quiet aftermath of the legal ordeal, Emma attempted to rebuild the life she had envisioned, a life free from the ceaseless demands of a world built on pretense. Yet the price of victory had been steep. The constant pressure, the endless battles in the courtroom, had left her emotionally drained and questioning whether the freedom she had fought so desperately for was truly worth the cost. Friends and acquaintances in high society, though polite and well-meaning, could never bridge the gap between the person she had become and the woman she once was. Even Daniel, whose unwavering support had been a beacon of hope, could not reach the part of her that was broken. Every day, as she moved through her vast estate, Emma felt the hollowness of her existence. The mansion's grand rooms, designed to exude warmth and sophistication, instead mirrored her inner desolation. Public appearances and carefully orchestrated events became routine performances, each one draining more of the energy she could no longer muster. The media, quick to pivot to the next scandal, had already shifted its attention, leaving Emma alone to confront the reality of her new life. In the quiet solitude of her private moments, Emma began to question whether the fight had been worth it. The money, the security, and even the recognition that came with winning the legal battle were all tainted by the realization that she had lost something invaluable along the way: her sense of self. The hard-won victory, which should have been a triumphant moment of liberation, now felt like a bittersweet echo of what might have been. It was a victory that left her with the wealth to live comfortably, but not with the comfort of a soul at peace. As the weeks turned into months, Emma tried to fill the void with distractions. She attended social events, hosted charity dinners, and even started to make small contributions to causes that mattered to her. Yet, in every interaction and every smile, there remained an undercurrent of emptiness, a reminder that the battle had taken something irreplaceable. The woman who had once dared to dream was now a shadow of herself, burdened by a legacy she never chose and a victory that came at too high a price. In those long, silent nights, as the city lights twinkled distantly beyond the mansion's windows, Emma wrestled with her thoughts. The hollow victory had shown her that even the sweetest triumph could leave a bitter aftertaste. She realized that true freedom wasn't measured in dollars or legal wins. It was found in the quiet moments of authenticity, in the ability to reconnect with the person beneath the mask. And so, with each passing day, Emma began a quiet journey inward, determined to reclaim the fragments of her soul that had been lost in the battle for survival and success. Yet, as Emma sought solace within the walls of her grand estate, the specter of her past continued to haunt her. Despite the legal settlement and her newfound financial security, the Randolph family's influence remained a persistent, oppressive presence in her life. Edward's maneuvers had not ended with the courtroom victory. Even as the dust settled, he found new ways to reassert his power. One cold morning, Emma awoke to discover that her bank accounts had been frozen. The funds, her lifeline, the promise of security, were locked behind layers of legal technicalities engineered by Edward's far-reaching influence. Calls to the bank produced vague explanations and assurances that seemed designed only to frustrate her. It was a calculated move, a final act of defiance by someone who believed she was unworthy of the fortune that had once seemed so certain. The shock of this revelation sent ripples through Emma's carefully constructed life. It was not merely a financial setback. It was a symbolic act meant to strip her of the independence she had fought so hard to attain. Desperate to reclaim what was rightfully hers, Emma enlisted Daniel's help once more. Together, they pored over a mountain of documents and hidden records, uncovering evidence of secret deals and illicit transactions, details that pointed to Edward's orchestrated scheme. The deeper they dug, the more damning the evidence became. Each discovery was a small victory in itself, a reminder that the battle was not yet won. With this newfound leverage, Emma prepared for a final confrontation, a showdown that would force Edward to acknowledge that she was no longer the fragile pawn he had once presumed her to be. The renewed legal fight was as intense as it was personal. The media, ever hungry for scandal, seized upon the unfolding drama. Headlines painted a picture of a woman caught between the ruthless machinations of a powerful family and her own struggle for autonomy. Emma's plight resonated with the public, transforming her into a reluctant symbol of resistance. Even as the legal system churned with renewed fervor, she began to see the case not just as a fight for money, but as a battle to reclaim her life from the shadows of the past, a past that threatened to undo everything she had worked so hard to achieve. In the midst of these struggles, Emma found herself revisiting memories of her earlier life, a time when her greatest challenge was simply surviving another night behind the bar. The contrast between then and now was stark. The hardships of her youth, though painful, had instilled in her a resilience that no amount of wealth could buy. That same resilience now fueled her determination to break free from Edward's stranglehold once and for all. With every legal victory and every piece of evidence unearthed, Emma felt herself reclaiming a fragment of the woman she once was, a woman defined not by her circumstances, but by her strength and the unyielding desire to forge her own destiny. And so, as the final chapters of the legal battle began to take shape, Emma realized that the shadows of the past were not chains meant to imprison her, but lessons that would ultimately guide her toward true freedom. The fight was far from over, but each step she took was a testament to the fact that no one could ever truly erase the indomitable spirit of a woman determined to write her own story. In the uneasy calm that followed the legal skirmishes, Emma found herself wrestling with an unexpected enemy: loneliness. Though she had won financial battles and carved out a new identity in the elite circles of society, the isolation within her luxurious mansion grew heavier with each passing day. The silence was unyielding, a constant reminder that despite her outward success, a part of her had been lost in the relentless pursuit of power and security. Emma's once fiery determination began to wane beneath the crushing weight of solitude. Desperate for escape from the oppressive quiet, she turned to alcohol. At first, it was a modest glass of wine in the evenings, an innocent attempt to dull the persistent ache inside her. But soon, that single glass transformed into two, then three, until the drink became her constant companion. The downward spiral was gradual, yet relentless. What had started as a temporary refuge soon became a crutch, and before long, Emma found herself caught in the grip of a destructive cycle. The mansion, with its opulent rooms and endless corridors, transformed from a symbol of victory into a vast, echoing prison where every indulgence only deepened her despair. Social events and high society gatherings, once a stage for her carefully curated persona, began to feel like cruel reminders of the life she had lost. In public, she wore the mask of Mrs. Randolph, a poised and elegant figure, but behind closed doors, the loneliness was overwhelming. Daniel Harper, her loyal friend and legal advisor, noticed the change. His concerned glances and soft-spoken advice went unheeded as Emma sank deeper into self-destruction. She began to withdraw from the few meaningful relationships she had managed to forge, retreating into a world of isolated nights and numbed senses. Her thoughts often drifted to her past, back to the days behind the bar, when the struggle was tangible and every challenge had a clear enemy. Now, however, the enemy was intangible. It was the crushing silence of a life that had lost its meaning. One particularly cold night, as Emma stared out at the glittering city lights through the expansive windows of her mansion, she realized with a heavy heart that the very success she had fought so desperately to achieve was now turning against her. The wealth, the security, the name that had once promised a brighter future now felt like a gilded cage from which there was no escape. In a moment of quiet despair, she questioned whether the battle had truly been worth it. The fight for recognition, for money, for freedom, had it all come at the cost of her soul? As days turned into weeks, the downward spiral only intensified. Emma's health began to suffer visibly, and the once vibrant spark in her eyes was dimmed by fatigue and sorrow. The luxurious mansion, with all its splendor, was now shrouded in an atmosphere of melancholy, a physical manifestation of the inner void that no legal victory or monetary settlement could ever fill. And yet, even as the darkness threatened to consume her, a part of Emma's spirit, fragile and faint, yearned for a way out of this despair. The thought of reclaiming her identity and finding solace in something genuine lingered, even as the poison of alcohol and isolation tightened its grip on her life. At the edge of her own self-destruction, Emma reached a critical juncture. The victory in court, the settlement that should have marked the beginning of a new life, now lay tarnished by loneliness and the creeping despair of a soul lost amid glitter and pretense. In the quiet, early hours of one chilly morning, as the first rays of sunlight struggled through the heavy curtains, Emma finally acknowledged the truth. She was at a crossroads. The lavish mansion, the fortune, the carefully constructed persona, none of it could fill the emptiness that had grown inside her. Instead of continuing down the same path of self-destruction, she realized that true liberation lay in reclaiming the parts of herself that had been buried under years of sacrifice and survival. Determined to reclaim her identity, Emma made a promise to herself that day. No longer would she allow the ghosts of the past and the relentless pressure of a world obsessed with appearances to dictate her future. She began small, attending support groups, reconnecting with old friends, and even seeking professional help to address the deep-seated pain that had driven her to drink. With Daniel's encouragement and the quiet support of a few genuine connections, Emma slowly started to rebuild her life, one fragile step at a time. She immersed herself in projects that gave her purpose, volunteering at local charities, writing about her experiences, and even mentoring young women who found themselves trapped by circumstance. Each act, however modest, was a defiant strike against the darkness that had once consumed her. Over time, the vast halls of her mansion transformed from symbols of isolation to canvases on which she could paint a new beginning, a life where wealth and success were not measured solely by material gain, but by the strength of character and the capacity for genuine connection. In a final, poignant moment, as she sat by a window watching the city come alive with promise, Emma allowed herself to believe that this was not the end of her story. Instead, it was a turning point, a moment when the lessons of her past, painful as they were, became the foundation for a future built on authenticity, resilience, and hope. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Emma felt the stirrings of true possibility. The battle had scarred her, yes, but it had also revealed the indomitable spirit that resided within. And in that fragile hope, she found the courage to step forward into a future that was entirely her own, a future where, at last, she could begin to live rather than merely survive. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts and what you'd like to see next. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.